In-depth coverage of the top stories and breaking news when it happens. News Radio 1080 KRLD.
The Institute for Predictive Analytics in Criminal Justice at Tarleton State has just released its annual report on racial profiling data in Texas. Fifth year that the data has been analyzed, and the depth of the data is improving as well. Dr. Alex Del Carmen is the founder of the Institute. He's helped lead the way in looking into what all this data means. Remind us why this was instigated.
Well, you know, John, after the death of George Floyd, the chancellor for the A&M system called upon every university that is part of A&M to simply come together and figure out a way that we could assist law enforcement. And so that led to many conversations, which ultimately led to the idea that, popped in my head that we should create an institute at the A&M level. In other words, for all of the universities that belong to the A&M system, to basically study law enforcement, to come up with the basis of predicting as best as we can any trends that come up. And so we created the Institute for Predictive Analytics in Criminal Justice, which is based out of Tarleton and Fort Worth. And our job is essentially to look at statewide data and be able to inform the public in an objective manner.
So as data continues to come in, you get better and better trends or numbers to see if trends emerge. When you look at this most recent data that's been compiled, what's standing out to you?
It's really fascinating, right? From those of us that have been, in my case, 25 years working with racial profiling data, for the first time in the state's history, we now have, or we're able to come up with averages for what the quote-unquote typical law enforcement agency in Texas is basically enduring as it relates to traffic stops, as it relates to contraband seized, obviously controlling and looking at it from the racial perspective. So we're really excited about this study because we now have enough data to be able to say, the average across the state is the following. And I have no doubt that this data is going to be very useful for us next year when we analyze individual reports.
And when you look at Hispanic contraband hit rates, Hispanics are targeted more than whites.
I wouldn't say that they're targeted per se, but what I would say is that what we look for the level, the number of searches that are performed by law enforcement, and then ultimately what that search results in. In other words, if the searches are, they simply show that a significant percentage of them result in contraband being seized or an arrest being made, then we figure that's good law enforcement, at hand. But what concerns us is when we see that a particular percentage of searches are being performed in a particular jurisdiction, and the percentage of contraband that is seized is so low that when compared to that of whites and perhaps other races, that gives us rise for concern.
Really, really interesting. And also you put on here that the relative risk of consent search of minorities, there are some trends there. What did you find in this case?
Well, what we found is that, minorities are more likely to consent to a search than non-minorities, right? And some people hypothesize that the reason for that is because in some cases minorities may not understand English, may not be able to understand their constitutional rights to simply say no to a consensual searches. In other times, people hypothesize that in some cases, I would argue perhaps a few, law enforcement is quote unquote coercing to have that person consent to a search. I look at the numbers and I look at the facts. I don't take any political component on this. And what concerns me is the fact that the public seems to be unaware of some of their rights, particularly in the minority community.
That is Dr. Alex Del Carmen from the Institute for Predictive Analytics in Criminal Justice at Tarleton State.